Hello and welcome to a pilot episode of a new series on this channel, which is we have a name that has just been decided on in the last minute that we may or may not stick, the TV archive. Now, you may be wondering, what is this going to be about? Well, it's going to be a podcast series talking about each year of television from 1990 to the present day. And joining me for this adventure is going to be a fellow TV historian, my good friend Andrew, who I've collaborated with previously on my music channel, Williams Schmilliams. But this is going to be something a bit different for this channel. Mostly it will have been just video essays and the like. But I wanted to get into something a bit more discussion based around television because I watch enough of it. So I may as well, you know, categorize them into their individual years. And I think, I'm really excited to start this journey. And Andrew, thank you so much for joining me on it on this completely unhinged, way too in depth journey that this is going to be.
Yeah, thank you for having me. As you said, I'm watching all this stuff anyways. Might as well, get some structure to it.
Yeah, exactly. And you may be wondering why 1990? Why not sooner? Why not later? I don't think I ever considered starting earlier than 1990 just because of my TV biases being more 21st century. But um, I think we were just talking off air, like in terms of new shows starting, it's one of the biggest years ever, really. Like Twin Peaks came along and pretty much changed serial television forever. You also had arguably the most influential sitcom of all time in Seinfeld, arguably the most influential animated show of all time in The Simpsons, all sort of getting their first full series. And then you had a lot of other gems that people really still enjoy today. So it was a pretty good place to start, I think. So without further ado, let's break down the format. Um, we're going to begin each episode talking about the big shows that debut in the year. I've given away some of them for which is going to be episode two, is going to be 1990. Andrew will talk about the most popular shows of the year in terms of ratings. And then we'll just talk about the year as a whole, how strong we think it is. Obviously, this will be more of a thing later on, how strong we think it compares to years past. We'll both then discuss big shows that we won't have seen, because believe it or not, there are shows that some of it that we haven't seen. And we will then list our 5 through 2, give our honorable mentions, list our number ones. We will then give our episode of the year and our performance of the year, which I'm really looking forward to hearing. And then we'll look ahead to the next year. So we're not only going to talk about 1990 and beyond, though, because we have both prepared lists of our favorite pre-1990 shows. I have three. Andrew has five. Andrew, you go ahead first and tell me your five favorite shows from before our time period that we are discussing.
Right. So I tried to limit this down to shows that I've seen, uh, if not all of, the vast majority of, and that completed their run prior to this year we're starting, because we're going to have some that maybe kicked off in the late 80s, carried into the 90s, and I may speak about later. But as far as these pre-1990 shows go, for me, the conversation began in the 50s and 60s with anthology series. And the first one of those was Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Uh, the famous director, he basically introduces each story. It's usually some kind of crime related affair. And over the course of, I believe it ran for 8-ish years, and then there was an hour-long program after that. You get a lot of famous actors doing their thing, showing up in these nice little stories. When I say nice, they're usually somebody murdering somebody else and trying to get away with it. But probably my favorite out of all of these shows was the 1960s, The Twilight Zone. And these are basically like top class, like mini sci-fi fantasy films. Really leans into the twists, and probably some of my favorite episodes uh, ever happen in this series. And I also want to shout out Police Squad. That takes us right into the 80s. Hilarious one season show that would later turn into the Naked Gun film franchise. It's a shame it only lasted 6 episodes, but uh, definitely want to highlight that. And beyond that, I guess I would focus on another sitcom that I had seen the entirety of, which is Family Ties. That ran, I believe, from 82 to 89, starring Michael J. Fox. Basically, conservative uh, boy. The children were tend to be more conservative, and the hippie parents, and kind of the clashing of the generations in a way that was kind of the opposite of what you saw in generations prior. So that's kind of a prototypical 80s sitcom for me that I'm very familiar with. And there'll probably be some that kind of carry the mantle into the 90s as well that we'll speak about later. And that's about what I'd like to highlight for before 1990.
Nice, nice. Yeah, of those, The Twilight Zone is the one I'm the most sort of aware of. I've not seen any of it actually, and I think it says a lot about that show that a lot of its contemporaries, in terms of those anthology shows, you can get loads of full episodes on YouTube. The Twilight Zone is still behind a rent paywall on Amazon Prime because it's, so popular still. And, people who love shows like Black Mirror, people in the UK who love Inside Number Nine, they're probably going to sort of look back eventually and find other anthology shows, and that is the anthology show. So, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people share that as one of their favorite pre-1990 shows. I have three I want to shout out, and we have none in common. Mine are all British shows, which will be a bit of a trend for me. My comedy preferences lean British. I think I prefer that more like downbeat. Very rarely. I was sort of in these earlier ones. They were in front of a live audience, but that was sort of phased out. I think quicker in the UK, um, and that sort of more downbeat, sarcastic, pessimistic feel that you do get in shows like Seinfeld and Arrested Development, but yeah, there will be a lot of British comedies on here. It's just what I've grown up on, and I've ranked these loosely. So my number three would be The Young Ones, which is Rick Mayall, Adrian Edmondson, um, before they did Bottom, which was also a largely successful, hugely popular show. The Young Ones is not perfect. It does sort of show its age at times, but the best episodes are some of my favorite comedy episodes ever. There is like a real quickness to the humor, which I really enjoy, which is true of all these three shows. There's a lot of great chemistry between the actors, and Rick Mayall in general is just one of my favorite comedy performers ever. It's sort of a very political show. And at the time, I think there wasn't really anything else like it. It's very off the wall and absurd and surrealist. So yeah, Young Ones is good. My number two is a show called Porridge, which was massively, massively popular here in the UK, starring Ronnie Barker, about a prison. And there's only like 20 episodes of it. But I think of all the shows of this sort of 60s, 70s era of British comedy, this one holds up better than any of the other ones. My dad loves these old shows, and a lot of them I just zone out of. But whenever he puts Porridge on, I do really enjoy it. Ronnie Barker, again, similar to Rick Mayall, just sort of a legend of comedy, so quick and dry. And yeah, again, some of my favorite, like really dumb jokes come from this show. And the setting of the prison as well was quite unusual for a sitcom at that time. But it works really well. It works really well. It has that sort of more, yeah, pessimistic tone, but it's a really effective show and really funny. And my number one is one that I think more people will be aware of than those other two. I think those other two shows are sort of more restricted to Britain. This one has classic status across the world. It's Blackadder, specifically Blackadder 2 and Blackadder Goes Forth. Blackadder 1's okay, Blackadder 3's good, but 2 and 4 are some of my favorite seasons of comedy television. Two is set during the Elizabethan age, and Blackadder Goes Forth, of course, during the First World War, and has the very famous sort of ending, which I won't spoil if you don't know it, but most people know it. It's quite iconic, and just for the people involved, this is such an interesting time capsule. You have Rowan Atkinson, of course, who'd go on to be Mr. Bean, among other things. Rick Mail, also here from the Young Ones, has some brief but incredibly memorable appearances. His like 4 minute appearance in Blackadder Goes Forth is so good, and I quote so much of it. It's so densely packed with quotable moments. Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie are here as well. Um, and then some sort of more lesser known but very, very good actors as well, like Tim McInerney, who is one of my favorite comedy actors, and has a drama role in Game of Thrones as well, I believe. I think as Manderley, Lord Manderley in Game of Thrones, briefly in that, but he's great. And yeah, Tony Robinson. It's just a really stacked cast of great performers, and there's a reason that it's sort of lived on as this legendary comedy. Especially, yeah, 2 and 4, absolutely fantastic. And that is my favorite show from pre 1990.
That's a great shout out. I feel like I'll be a bit of a litmus test for how familiar I am with the programs over across the Atlantic. But yeah, I haven't seen Blackadder proper, but I have seen clips here and there. So definitely out of those ones you mentioned would be one I'd be interested in checking out one day.
Yeah, and it's like most British comedies, it's an easy watch because it's 4 seasons of 6 episodes each, So, and they're all like standalone as well, so you can just watch 2 and 4 if you want. Those are the best ones. Um,
Might have to start with those on your recommendation.
yeah, and that might be an interesting trend you might see throughout this series. Maybe that will speak to our differences in our lists, but that's the fun of it. When we do have overlap, it's going to be all the more exciting. So, yeah. Before I end this pilot episode, I'm sure future episodes will be longer than this one. Andrew, any final thoughts going into the series and what you're excited about? Are there any shows in particular that you've not seen that you are really excited to check out, or are you mostly sticking to your guns with what you've got?
Well, first off, I think you pretty much picked the perfect point to start for a real year by year breakdown. I mean, you've got some of the mainstays, like you mentioned, starting, number of other ones that began at the end of the prior decade and kind of get more of a foothold in these early 90s years. And I'll get to the ones probably later that I haven't seen. I mean, Sopranos is the elephant in the room for shows that I haven't seen. So we'll get to that one later. But TV has always been less intuitive to me than film and music to kind of think about in the context of these years because they do span quite a length of time and evolve. So I do really like the opportunity to break down this format and look at kind of these year pictures within our personal scope.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and if you don't get to The Sopranos by the time we get to 1999, that's fine because I will be talking a lot about The Sopranos on this series. So you don't have to worry about representation if you're a massive Sopranos fan and you're only coming for that. You're gonna get your Sopranos love. Calm down. For me, yeah, I agree with you. I think there's something very interesting because a lot of these I didn't even like pay attention to what year that each season was coming out. So when I was looking at individual years, like 2014, without name dropping specific TV shows, there are some titans in there. That is an absurdly strong year, and I probably wouldn't have noticed that beforehand. Um, and then even looking at 1990, the again, to speak of the elephant in the room, a show like Twin Peaks existing on network television alongside a lot of these other shows makes it even more stark how influential and how ahead of its time that show was. Not to say that the other shows that were coming out weren't great. There's a lot of great stuff, but it's just so different and it is so ahead of its time is the only real word I can think of for it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to breaking down each year as they come. Please do join us for this podcast series. We would really appreciate it if you left a comment of your favorite shows pre 1990 and maybe just mention your favorite show of all time in the comments, and we'll see if either of us mention it by the end of this series. I'm sure we will, whether it's on our list or if it is mentioned as a miss that we didn't get to. But for the first episode of the not fully titled, but probably titled The TV Archive, thank you for joining myself and Andrew. And hopefully, we'll catch you for episode 2, where we'll be talking about our top 5 favorite shows of 1990.